So I have always been really interested in improvisation, and in particular, how to improvise in a self-contained way. You know, just to sit down with the guitar and hold down a groove and play some licks over it and make it sound good, make it sound cool. Now, that can seem like a really daunting proposition because the way a lot of us learn fingerstyle guitar is in terms of fixed pieces. And it seems hard enough just to do that because there's all this stuff you gotta coordinate between your thumb and your fingers and the different voicings you're doing. And so that at least feels like a fair fight because you've got this transcription or this tab and you're like, well, as long as I put in the hours, I should be able to get this stuff to where, you know, I know everything I'm supposed to do and I can do it in order and I can maybe even memorize it and then just play it over and over until it, you know, the muscle memory takes over and I can just deliver this thing. So the idea of taking all that and then saying, wait, and then I'm going to make stuff up on top of it can seem impossible. But turns out it can be done. You can actually acquire the skills to improvise in a methodical and stepwise kind of way. And that can sound really counterintuitive, but in this video, I want to just break down the 3 big steps towards doing that very thing and suggest along the way a few simple things that you can work on to make that happen. Now, I should say, on October 15th, I will be doing a more in-depth live online workshop on this very topic. And if you'd like to learn more about that, when it is, how it works, how much it costs, and all that stuff, you can find out at the link below or the link on screen. So the first step is learning how to compose a solo or work out a solo in advance. And that sounds completely counterintuitive. If you're trying to improvise, why would you want to make up something that stays the same? And the reason is because composing a solo, whether that's literally like writing it out for yourself or making something up and recording it into your phone or into your computer and memorizing it, whatever it is, coming up with something specific is a way of modeling in slow motion what you're going to be doing in real time when you're improvising. So when you compose or make up a solo, you are basically slowing things down and saying, okay, given enough time and space to really consider this, I would start with this lick, then I would go to that lick, then I would go to this combination of moves, and then I would finish with this thing. And you can sit and puzzle it out and work it out so that you have a model for what a solo could sound like. Now, if this is something that you want to do, you need a vocabulary of licks. And one of the best ways to start creating a vocabulary of licks is to start working on what I think of as rudiments. So if you're playing a steady bass, you want to start looking at the different things you need to be able to do to put different rhythms over that steady bass using your fingers. And you can make these things up and practice them just using open strings to get the coordination together. And then you can start thinking about what notes you're going to play. So for example, at its simplest, you just want to be able to play single notes at the same time as the thumb on top. Half notes or quarter notes. And then maybe move on to playing eighth notes, so that you can feel that swing rhythm. And then you can start to cut those things up and move them around so that maybe it's some eighth notes and some quarter notes, or maybe you even leave some rests and you come in on the ands, which starts to sound a little groovier because now you're playing a more syncopated feel. But you want to just sit and get some of that coordination together and figure out what you can do against the thumb just on one string. And then you can start to add notes to that by taking one scale, like the E minor pentatonic scale or the E blues scale, and take one rhythm at a time and kind of put it through the paces of applying it to that particular sound or that particular scale. And once you've done that and created like some licks, a bit of a vocabulary, then you can start to look at different ways to kind of put those together. And the putting them together is the modeling of the improvising, that maybe you want to have a lick that goes up, and maybe you want to answer it with one that comes down. And then maybe you want to answer it with something longer that repeats the first one and then answers that. So you need a vocabulary to start doing those things with. So working on those rhythmic rudiments will give you the coordination to start creating licks from the blues scale. Then you can start to put them together and sort of practice in slow motion what it would sound like to connect this lick to that lick, and so on. So the first step is just to start composing some solos. And you can do it just over a vamp like that, just over one chord, to start getting that sense of flow and that sense of call and response and how those different rhythms work with the blues scale and connect up to each other. So once you've got this composed solo as a framework or a model, the next thing you can try to do, the second step, is to swap in different licks. Now, improvising looks like someone is making up all this stuff on the spot, but a lot of times it's more modular than that. And the person you're watching has got like this stash of licks and they're making choices about when to put them where. So if you're using the composed solo as a model, then the next step is to say, well, this composed solo is built out of these 4 moments. So in the example I gave before, we're starting with that and then answering, then repeating the first one, and then answering it with something new at the very end. So if that's the model, and then if you've also used those rhythmic rudiments to come up with some different licks that have similar rhythmic structure, then you might have 3 or 4 licks on hand that would all work in that opening spot. So you might have this first one, or you might have this descending one, maybe something with some double stops, maybe something like... The idea is those all have a very similar rhythmic shape. They all start on the and of 1, they all land on the root, and they all take up about the same amount of space. So you could start going through playing your model solo around and around and just say, well, every time I start, I'm going to start with a different one of those 4 licks and then continue on. So that's one time through. Now maybe this time I'll start by descending and play that twice, because that's what the solo was doing in the second phrase. And then so if I've got a different lick to start with, maybe I can play that, and then... So I'm not changing anything except the first phrase, but I've got this stash of 3 or 4 licks, and I'm just trying to rotate them in, because one of the things you need to be able to do is grab from your supply of licks on the fly and drop it into the solo in the right spot. So the second thing you can do is practice swapping licks in, but you're not having to create the whole thing from scratch because you've got this composed or model solo. And so you just start by saying, well, first phrase, I'll drop in some different licks. Or maybe third phrase, I'll drop in some different licks. And so you're getting used to the idea of having specific spots that represent something, a certain kind of lick or a certain kind of phrase, and you have different choices for that spot. And any one of those 4 spots in the composed solo could be available for you to swap something in. You could swap in something different for every spot, but that would be too much to practice at once. So you want to isolate and just go, okay, first lick of the solo, I'm going to practice swapping things in. When I'm comfortable with that, I'll keep everything the same, but I'll swap in the second lick, and so on. So you're, trying to do a little bit at a time and not do all of it at once. So once you can create or compose a model solo, and you have a few different licks that you can swap in different spots of that solo, and you've practiced doing that, the third thing you want to do is internalize the form of that composed or model solo. And so that you have a little map in your head of where any typical solo might go. So in the example that I gave, I'm basically playing the same shape to the solo every time. I'm playing an opening lick, which we can think of as the first phrase or the A. I'm answering that with a second phrase. We can think of that as B. The third time, I'm playing the same phrase I opened with, so we're back to A. So A, B, A is the shape we've got so far. And then we're going to a new lick, so that's C. So we're playing a form. We're playing A, B, A, C. And when you think about the lyrics to the blues, that has a typical AAB form. You say a line, you repeat it, then there's a different third line that's kind of the punch line of the tune. A lot of Tin Pan Alley tunes, Broadway tunes have an AABA form. You got an 8-bar section, it repeats. There's a B section that's the bridge and back to A. So this idea of playing with form is, it runs throughout all kinds of roots music that we play. So we can think of this composed solo as having an ABAC form. And if you can get that into your head, then even though we're just playing on a vamp, instead of just having all this wide open space, you're going to come up with things that fulfill this idea of an ABAC structure, which right now is just, you only need 3 licks to do that. An A lick, a B answer, and then an A lick that goes into a final C concluding answer. If you can build yourself a little vocabulary of licks using those right hand, picking hand rudiments to get those different rhythms into your hands and apply it to the blues scale and get used to the idea of swapping in licks that in a specific moment, and then, sort of keep all that organized in your head with this ABAC roadmap, then when you sit down to play, ultimately you just take your collection of licks, and if you've internalized that ABAC idea from playing it a lot of times, that is when it starts to feel like improvising, because you will reach a point, you have to, start by doing all this stuff consciously. But when you see someone sit down and play who really seems to know what they're doing as an improviser, a lot of it is that this structural stuff, the idea of playing through a form, may not literally be ABAC, but the sense of phrasing, the sense of call and response, the sense of playing phrases as opposed to just random notes from a scale, they've internalized all that. And there is no reason you can't internalize all that too. It takes a certain kind of stepwise practice to do it, but it is something that you can practice just like you can practice anything else. So start with this idea of composing a solo, making something up of your own, and using those rhythmic rudiments to find ways to play the blues scale in a way that sounds like phrases and licks instead of just notes of the scale. And then practice swapping them in to the solo you've composed. And finally, try to memorize and internalize that idea of an A-B-A-C form so that when you sit down to put licks together, you have a roadmap in your head of what that can sound like and what it can look like. Again, I will be doing a workshop in much more detail on all of these ideas on October 15th. Go to the link below or the link on screen to find out more about it. In the meantime, if you've got questions about this lesson or a comment, I would love to hear from you. Leave your thoughts down below. As ever, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.